The boarding gate buzzed with the usual flurry of activity, announcements echoing overhead, the rhythmic beeping of scanners reading boarding passes, and the shuffle of passengers eager to secure their seats. Among them was Camille Johnson, a sharp, composed black woman in her early 40s. She wasn't just another traveler on this flight, she was the newly appointed CEO of a fast-rising tech firm, on her way to New York for a crucial investor meeting that could shape the future of her company. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with gold accents at the wrist, she carried herself with a calm authority that naturally drew attention. People moved around her, but her presence was steady, commanding. Camille always flew first class, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. As someone who often worked late into the night, she cherished those few hours of relative quiet and comfort to prepare presentations, review contracts, or simply recharge before facing the next storm of meetings. She had reserved seat 2A weeks in advance, a window seat that gave her just enough privacy to focus while still observing the world outside. When her boarding group was called, she smiled politely at the flight attendants and made her way to the cabin, pulling her slim leather carry-on behind her. But as soon as she approached row 2, her steps slowed. There, in her seat, sat a middle-aged white man with sandy hair, broad shoulders, and an expensive-looking golf jacket. He lounged casually, already sipping from the welcome drink a flight attendant had offered, his legs stretched out into the aisle as though he owned the space. His coat was draped carelessly over the armrest, and his phone blared faint notifications, which he ignored. Camille paused, certain she must have made a mistake, and double-checked the ticket displayed on her phone screen. Clear as day. Seat 2A. Excuse me, she began, her tone calm but firm, I believe you're in my seat. The man didn't even look up at first, as though the interruption were a nuisance beneath his attention. When he finally raised his eyes, they narrowed with irritation rather than recognition. No, this is my seat, he said flatly, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that suggested he was used to being obeyed. Camille maintained her composure. She held up her boarding pass so he could see. It says here, 2A. That's where you're sitting. The man glanced at it briefly and then chuckled dismissively, shaking his head. You must have read it wrong. This is definitely my seat. Why don't you check again? His tone wasn't just dismissive, it was patronizing, the kind of voice one might use with a child. Several passengers nearby shifted in their seats, sensing the tension rising. A woman in 3C glanced from Camille to the man, lips pressed tightly as if she wanted to speak but chose silence. The flight attendant closest to them, a young brunette balancing a tray, approached cautiously. Is everything all right here? Yes, Camille said, keeping her voice steady. It seems there's a seating error. I have 2A, but he's occupying it. The man leaned back smugly, swirling the ice in his drink. I've already settled in here. Can't you just take another seat? There are plenty of empty ones further back. Camille's jaw tightened, but she refused to let his arrogance provoke her. I paid for this seat. I selected it specifically. I will not be moved because someone else feels entitled to take it. The flight attendant looked uncomfortable, caught between them. She checked Camille's boarding pass, then the man's. Her brows furrowed. Sir, it looks like your assigned seat is actually 14C, back in economy. The man scoffed loudly, drawing the attention of more passengers. This is ridiculous. I'm not sitting back there. Do you know who I am? Camille raised an eyebrow at the irony of his question, though she said nothing. The attendant tried again, her voice polite but strained. Sir, this seat is reserved. You'll need to move. Instead of complying, he dug in. No, I'm staying right here. If she wants a seat so badly, she can sit in the back. He gestured vaguely toward the coach section, as though the suggestion were reasonable. Camille inhaled deeply, her patience thinning. Years of being underestimated, dismissed, or challenged in boardrooms by men just like him had taught her how to control her expression. But there was something sharper in her gaze now, a quiet defiance. I will not be displaced from my rightful seat, she said, her voice low but unyielding. Not in this cabin, not in this company, not in this life. The cabin grew quieter as passengers leaned in, curious about how this standoff would end. Some recorded discreetly on their phones. The tension had shifted. It was no longer just about a seat, but about principle, respect, and dignity. The man tried to wave off the attention. Come on, sweetheart, Don't make a scene. Just sit somewhere else and let's get on with it. That word, sweetheart, was the final crack in the mask. Camille didn't flinch, but her silence was loaded. The flight attendant, clearly overwhelmed, excused herself to fetch the head purser. Within minutes, the purser arrived, a seasoned woman with the kind of authority that could settle disputes quickly. She listened carefully to both sides, examined the boarding passes again, and then fixed the man with a no-nonsense stare. "Sir, you are in the wrong seat. You must move immediately, or we will have to involve security." The man's face reddened. "This is outrageous. You can't treat me like this." "On the contrary," the purser replied calmly, "you are treating this passenger unfairly. She has every right to be here." Camille stood quietly, her presence commanding even in stillness. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. Her very composure highlighted the man's childish obstinance. The murmurs in the cabin had turned into whispers of support, passengers muttering about entitlement, privilege, and the nerve of someone to steal a first-class seat and then refuse to move. Finally, as the purser gestured toward the aisle, 2 uniformed airport security officers appeared at the cabin door. The man sputtered, suddenly less sure of himself, but it was too late. His refusal to budge had escalated the situation. Passengers craned their necks, some whispering, others outright smirking, as he was told he would need to leave the aircraft if he didn't comply. Camille lowered her bag into the overhead bin, her movements deliberate, her dignity intact. She said nothing as the scene played out, but the message was clear: this was not just about a seat, but about standing her ground in a world that too often tried to push her aside. And in that charged silence, with all eyes watching, the plane's departure slipped further and further away from schedule, until the captain made the announcement no one expected: "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a passenger incident, this flight will be temporarily grounded." The announcement sent a ripple of frustration through the cabin. A grounded flight was every traveler's nightmare, but this time the cause was seated, or rather, refusing to move, in the first-class cabin. Murmurs rose like a wave, passengers exchanging incredulous glances and annoyed sighs. Some reached for their phones to update friends and family, while others leaned closer to capture every word, knowing the story was becoming something larger than an ordinary inconvenience. The man in Camille's seat flushed angrily, realizing the attention was turning against him. "This is ridiculous," he barked, his voice louder now, desperate to maintain control. "I'm a paying customer. I deserve to sit here. Why should she get special treatment?" His finger jabbed toward Camille, who remained perfectly composed, her expression unreadable. The purser's face hardened. "Sir, you were assigned a seat in economy. You refused to comply with both me and my crew. You have delayed this flight and created a disturbance for everyone aboard. That is unacceptable." Passengers clapped softly at the words, a quiet but clear show of support. The man's jaw clenched, his bravado crumbling under the collective disapproval. But instead of backing down gracefully, he doubled down. "You're all making a mistake. I'll sue this airline. I'll make sure you regret humiliating me like this." Camille finally spoke, her voice even but powerful enough to cut through the noise. "You humiliated yourself the moment you decided my place belonged to you. That has nothing to do with the airline, and everything to do with entitlement." Her words struck like a gavel in a courtroom, and for a moment the cabin went still. The officers stepped forward, their presence now unavoidable. "Sir, you need to deplane immediately. If you refuse, we will escort you off." The man looked around, hoping to find allies among the passengers, but all he met were eyes filled with disdain. Realizing his bluff had failed, he finally stood, muttering curses under his breath. He snatched his jacket and drink, sloshing liquid onto the carpet, and shoved past the officers. As he disappeared down the aisle, the cabin erupted in applause, passengers relieved that the disruption was finally ending. Camille didn't join the clapping. She lowered herself into her seat, with quiet dignity, placing her laptop bag under the chair in front of her. She simply adjusted her blazer and looked out the window, her composure unshaken. Years of fighting battles in the boardroom had prepared her for moments like this. She had nothing to prove to anyone in that cabin, her presence alone spoke louder than any argument could. Still, the delay stretched on. Security needed statements, paperwork had to be filed, and the crew had to confirm the flight was once again safe to depart. Camille used the time to open her laptop, reviewing her investor presentation with the calm precision of someone who refused to waste energy on anger. Around her, passengers whispered. A woman across the aisle leaned in with a smile. "Good for you. The way you handled him, remarkable. I don't think I would have stayed that calm." Camille offered a polite nod. Calmness is a choice. Anger feeds people like him. Denying that satisfaction is the real victory. The compliment spread through the cabin, passengers quietly praising her, some even offering words of solidarity as they passed on their way to the lavatory. What had started as a humiliating attempt to displace her had turned into a collective recognition of her strength. The story was no longer about a man stealing a seat, it was about a woman refusing to be erased. Nearly an hour later, the captain finally announced that the disruptive passenger had been removed from the premises entirely and the flight was cleared for departure. Groans of impatience gave way to sighs of relief. The engines hummed to life, and the plane taxied toward the runway. But the incident didn't fade as quickly as the man had hoped. Midway through the flight, a flight attendant returned to Camille's seat with a tray. On it was a glass of champagne and a small plate of chocolates. "Compliments of the captain, Ms. Johnson," the attendant said softly. "And please accept our sincerest apologies for what happened earlier." Camille thanked her, though she hadn't demanded an apology. She hadn't needed one. The moment the man was escorted off, the truth had already been clear. She had won simply by refusing to surrender what was hers. As the plane soared above the clouds, Camille reflected on the irony of it all. She was on her way to meet with investors who, no doubt, would test her authority in subtle and not so subtle ways. Men like the one she had just encountered were not confined to airplanes. They existed in boardrooms, contracts, and even casual conversations where her presence as a black woman in power disrupted unspoken assumptions. The seat she reclaimed was a metaphor for every space she'd had to fight to occupy, every door she'd had to walk through when someone tried to block her way. Hours later, when the plane landed in New York, passengers filed out slowly. Several stopped to wish her luck or simply to thank her for standing her ground. A businessman whispered, "You reminded me to speak up for myself." A younger black woman mouthed, "Thank you," her eyes shining with quiet admiration. Camille accepted each word with grace, though she didn't linger on them. She walked down the jet bridge with her head high, her carry-on rolling smoothly behind her. Outside, a driver waited with her name on a placard, ready to whisk her into the chaos of the city. What she didn't know, at least not yet, was that the incident had already gone viral. Several passengers had posted clips of the standoff online, and within hours, the story of the man who stole a CEO's seat and got himself escorted off a flight was trending. The headlines emphasized not just the drama, but the poise of the woman who never raised her voice, never wavered, and still emerged victorious. By the time she reached her hotel that evening, her assistant had already forwarded her a dozen requests from journalists. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. She hadn't set out to become a symbol or a story, she'd only wanted to sit in the place she paid for. But perhaps that was the point. Sometimes, dignity in small battles illuminated much larger truths. As she closed her laptop that night, preparing for the high-stakes meeting the next morning, she allowed herself one small reflection. Today, she had not only reclaimed her seat, she had reminded everyone watching, on that plane and beyond, that no one could strip her of what she had earned. The plane had been grounded, yes, but she had only risen higher.